recording. And boom. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the talk show with Jason Takhtadjian. My name is, of course, Jason Takhtadjian, the host of the talk show. And we are here to talk to a very special guest. But before we go into that, just want to kind of break through just what we're talking about, what we're doing here today, and what this show is really about, if this is the first time that you're watching. The talk show is a show that's based about me talking to people who I'm interested in, either in the Armenian community or have a tie to the Armenian community. So they don't have to necessarily be Armenian, they're just people who I'm interested in, and obviously because of my culture and because of how close and connected I am with my Armenian culture, despite being born in the United States, this is something that I think is very important, and I think it's important to have very, big guests, but also important guests when it comes to the Central Valley and Fresno, and that's exactly who we have today. We have Michael Rettig. He is the chairperson of the Armenian Genocide Commemorative Committee. Michael, thank you so much for being on this show. We spoke for the first time on the phone just 24 hours ago.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. And I have honestly been thinking about having somebody to come on from the Armenian Genocide Commemorative Committee here in Fresno, because I want to learn a little bit more about that. You're the chairperson. You run the shots as far as, organizing these events that happen at Fresno State and outside of Fresno State. But first, just tell us what's going on this year.
Well, this year is both the 110th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide and also kind of special to the Central Valley because it's the 10th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide Monument at Fresno State. And I think that's a very unique monument, and it's a unique example of how our community banded together. I was in college when it happened, so a lot of people that I look up to in our community facilitated that, donated to that, and made that monument happen. And I know that monument means a lot to me then as a college student in the context of the Armenian Genocide having been denied by Turkey for so many years. To have this big monument, this representation of our community saying we are here and we survived and this is what we're capable of and we're not going to forget it, and we're also going to not let the world forget it. So that monument holds a special place to me as a Fresno State student, as a Fresno resident, and just being proud of our community and how we banded together to make that happen.
Yeah.
And so today this week we're commemorating both what happened to our ancestors and the 10th anniversary of that monument.
And 110 years since the Armenian Genocide. For those who maybe do or don't know, more than 1.5 million Armenians were killed and deported, and just really everything horrible that you can think about happened to them and to their families. And that happened from 1915 to 1923. There are atrocities even beforehand, and that's why it's so important here in Fresno, because of how big the Armenian community is, and the fact that Turkey just hasn't recognized the Armenian genocide in any capacity yet, and that's something that is still a wound that's open. And I know that is part of the reason why you got into what you're doing today as the chairperson of the AGCC. But this year, tell me about the process of putting together the genocide commemoration.
Well, in the past, it was usually the churches that came together and rotated every year. So a different church would host it at one of the churches, and the whole community would come together. And I think what's unique and nice about Fresno is that it didn't matter what political affiliation you were. It didn't matter what denomination you went to, if you were, which diocese you went to, if you were part of the Antilius Church or the Takhtadjian Church, or if you were Protestant Armenian, everybody really came together as a community. There were no barriers to commemorate what affected all of us. And it was at the 100th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide when we unveiled the monument. AGCC was created really to plan the 100th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide and the donations and building the monument itself. Mm-hmm. And it was decided after that event of unveiling the monument, commemorating the 100th anniversary, that the AGCC would continue to organize the Armenian Genocide commemoration. So we bring together representatives from all of the churches, from all of the political or just civic, whatever organizations we have in Fresno, send representatives From those representatives, we have like an executive council that does some of the behind the scenes stuff, but then we have our general meetings where the whole community comes together and we can talk about what we want to plan for each year's anniversary, whether it's keynote speakers, so we choose somebody either from our community or from outside of the community to come and speak. We have, facilitating the lights and sounds, the power to the monument, because, the monument's kind of out in the middle of Fresno State campus, so we have to plan how to get power, how to get lighting, and how to bring everybody together and represent the different aspects of our culture within that. So we have representatives from the Scouts partaking in our community, Home and Scouts. We have the Armenian School, which we're very proud of, participating. We have the clergy, and we bring together all these different aspects into a commemoration.
Absolutely. And, when it comes to that commemoration for this year specifically, for folks who want to know, who might want to go, it's, again, April 24th, Fresno State campus. It starts at 6:30, and I believe that's when the flower laying is going to start, correct?
So at 6:30, we'll be providing flowers for the community to set inside of the monument, and it's kind of a representation of what they do in Armenia every year to the genocide monument in Yerevan. So the whole country kind of bands together. They bring flowers to the monument and lay it inside by the eternal flame. And we kind of do something similar. Our monument was kind of designed or modeled to look similar to the one in Armenia, though it has differences, different representations. But we provide flowers at 6:30 for the community to come together, lay them at the monument, and then the official program will start at 7 o'clock.
Got you. And how long is those programs usually go?
Since COVID, we've been shooting for about an hour and 10 minutes, so an hour,
Gotcha.
15 minutes or so.
And I got the honor from Sevag, from you, to MC this year's commemoration, which, I've been here, like I told you, off camera. Tomorrow, on the time of recording, would be 1 year since I started here at the station. And it's just so... It's humbling to be invited to be the MC, to be called upon to do that, and be a representation for the Fresno community. It feels like they've already welcomed me with open arms. I know I still have a lot more connecting to do in the community because, my schedule and work definitely doesn't necessarily help, but it's definitely something that I need to do more work and connect with the community. And I think this is definitely a step that helps me connect with the community, and I just want to say thank you.
Yeah. We're very happy to have you here in our community and here at KC24 News. We're always proud to see the Armenians on TV, and so we're happy to have you, and we welcome you to Fresno.
I'm glad, because a lot of people, whenever I go into the community, they're like, "Oh, you're Armenian. Oh, Stephanie, right? Oh, this and that," because she was the main anchor here, and she was at KC for 42 years. She was our first guest, and she left her mark, she left a legacy here in the Armenian community, but also just for Fresno, for normal Fresno folks who aren't Armenian. They know who she is as well, and it's really nice to see. It's really nice to see just how the community comes together and just welcomes people in like that. And I think we need more of that. Is kind of having that unity of, it doesn't matter who you are, where you're coming from, if you're Western, Eastern Armenian, or even if you're not Armenian. We just got to kind of come together, and just make people welcome at home. That's how I feel.
Yeah, and I think a big part of it, too, is just as Armenians and as somebody who's faced such denial to the atrocities that happened to us, I think a lot of times we gravitate towards stuff like history, journalism, photography, the arts, creating things, reporting things, and we're always happy to, when we see people using those platforms to talk about the genocide and to bring awareness to it, because we've been faced with this denial for so long. We just feel like we need to shout it from the mountaintops that we're here and this is what happened to us and what in many places continues to happen to us. And we're always very proud to have people who are using those platforms to do that.
Thank you.
I know I speak for the community here, but I think everybody would agree. I don't speak for everybody, but I think everybody would agree with that.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And it means a lot because, we all do have, to some degree, a story that is connected to the Armenian genocide. And before I even go into that with you, I want to actually talk about your background. And I know some people that are watching, they'll be like, "Oh, Michael Rettig, he doesn't have an Armenian last name." Well, you're still Armenian. You're very Armenian, in fact. Can you tell us about, your background and your family background?
Yeah, so I'm three-quarters Armenian. So three of my grandparents were full Armenian, and I have a German grandpa who I inherit my last name from, so Rettig. Um, and growing up, I'm a fourth generation Armenian, so my ancestors pretty much came from the Ottoman Empire straight to Fresno. So every single branch came straight to Fresno. And over the years, the language gets lost, and I've been trying to learn it, but I grew up in Oakers, which is a little mountain community next to Fresno. This is kind of like I guess you could say, my Armenian awakening, and I didn't really have a concept of what it meant to be Armenian because I was fourth generation living in a small community. There were no other Armenians there, and it wasn't until I found my great-grandfather was an author during the Armenian genocide, so he wrote books, and most of it was in Armenian, but there was a couple that were in English. And when I read his books, that was the first time I ever felt proud to be Armenian. And I would read his books in English, read the stories of like Vartan, and read those old stories of Armenians fighting to preserve their heritage and faith. And I became very proud. And then we moved to Fresno, and I realized there's other Armenians. So I became really connected once I came. I kind of had this, I think, growing up removed from the community made me want to learn more and made me driven to figure out what it means to be Armenian because I didn't grow up with that knowledge.
I mean, not growing up with that knowledge and also growing up in Oakhurst, how long did you stay in Oakhurst before you moved to Fresno?
It was about 8 years.
So you were elementary school?
It was elementary school, but it was kind of those early days where it was in elementary school that I would read my great-grandfather's books, and that was my first introduction. And listening to Richard Hagopian's album records as a child, that was my introduction to the Armenian life, but that's pretty much where it stopped. Of course, we had the food at home, but I didn't know any other Armenians besides my parents, so I didn't have that community. And when I came to Fresno, especially in junior high and high school, is when I really started to seek that out and look for the Armenian clubs and look for ways to learn more and get involved and figure out what it meant to be Armenian.
Right. So to a lesser degree, I can kind of relate because I was born in Glendale, which, is Mecca for Armenians. But when I was about 6 or 7 years old, we moved to Las Vegas. And today, Vegas has a decent Armenian population. But when we moved, it was about, I want to say 2005, 2006, around that time. And the schools that I went to, the elementary schools I went to, Sandy Miller IB School, no other Armenians. So, the only way that I was really upholding, my Armenian culture until I started Armenian church later on was at home. And I was just proud to be an Armenian, but, my classmates didn't really understand that. They're like, what do you mean, Armenian, Romanian? What is that? What is that word? And then I'm trying to teach them words, and they're like, what? That doesn't sound right. So it was always just like a battle when it came to being the only Armenian in class and trying to, share your culture that is otherwise very unique and, different, that people don't really have something to relate to. Nowadays you think about the Kardashians or Cher, general people, but you don't really have somebody to relate to.
Yeah, I know exactly. I would have people say, "Are you Jewish or something?" And I would say, "No, I'm not Jewish. I'm Armenian." And they would say, "What are Armenians Jewish?" And I would say, "No." They had no conception of what it meant, and I didn't really, besides the food back then too, and what I read from the books.
That's interesting. I was always called Mexican or Hispanic or something like that growing up in Vegas because they see me with like a relatively dark complexion, the dark hair, the hairiness, and they're like, "Oh, you're Mexican." And they just start talking Spanish to me and just assuming, which I know just very little Spanish, so I'm just like, "Lo siento, no hablo español," you know. But that's just part of the shared, unique Armenian experience for Armenians who are maybe born and raised in places that don't have Armenians. And then whenever you move to Fresno, I mean, what was that like to now go to a city that has more Armenians that you not only are able to learn within your family, but you're able to kind of bounce off with friends and other people outside?
Yeah, I think I faced both acceptance and rejection. Because for some people, and we're in junior high and high school, so there's some people looking at me and saying, "Who is this Rettig? Is he Armenian? He doesn't speak the language." So there was an element of that, but a lot of other people who embraced me, especially like the elders in the community. I took dance lessons. I got involved with ASO before I was in college. So a lot of the elders really embraced me in the community, taught me the dances, taught me, really everything. Like, I wouldn't be organizing with the committee that I'm organizing it with if it weren't for learning so much from the people who have taught me, from Professor Barlow to Zardar Magarichian, to just so many elders in the community who have really mentored me along the way. And all of my best friends in junior high and high school became Armenian, but there was kind of an element of rejection too, because I was somebody new. I didn't have an Armenian last name, and we were in junior high, so there's a bit of that as well. But yeah, once I spent some time here, I loved the Fresno community. It was like one big family, and everybody, like, you go to these events, you know everybody. It doesn't, like I said earlier, it doesn't matter what your religion is or your denomination or your political affiliations. Everybody really looks after each other, and it's a very tight-knit community, which I appreciate about the Fresno Armenians itself, and it's one reason that I don't think I would leave Fresno. I never thought about leaving Fresno for college. I never thought about leaving to experience life somewhere else for any prolonged period, because I feel very rooted to the Armenian community here.
Wow, that's really neat, because I was thinking about it like, okay, you have moved to Fresno, you're in this big Armenian community. Do you ever think about maybe one day moving to Armenia or moving to Los Angeles or anything like that? But you just said it. You feel so connected here to Fresno, and I will say, 1 year being here in Fresno, I do kind of feel that sort of connection. I will admit, being closer to the beach is nice. Being closer to family is really nice. Because before Fresno, I was in Sioux City, Iowa, which is right in the middle of the country, an hour and a half drive from the nearest airport, which then you'd have to fly 3 hours to Vegas. But now I just feel like, the proximity to things and people that I want to be around, whether it's family, whether it's friends, whether it's my Armenian community, that's what's, kind of keeping me not just here in Fresno, but just in the industry too, really, when it comes to it, because it's just, what other industry do you have the opportunity to do stuff like this and talk to people like you and have to do these sort of stories and share these stories? Because I was struggling to even see or figure out how many Armenians we have in journalism. We have a lot in Los Angeles: Araxia Karapetian, Elina Obovian, Jacqueline Sarkeesian, Anna Alberian, all these people, Krista Kirkjian. And when I try to think about how many men there are, there isn't that many men.
Yeah.
I know there's Tom Durian out in Milwaukee. I know we had Doug Kazarian back in the day, who used to be on ESPN. But I'm struggling to find other guys like me to kind of relate to. So I just I'm just taking it onto my shoulders. I'm taking it onto my shoulders and taking every day as a new opportunity and just seeing it that way, because there's stories to be told. And I think your story is one of many stories to be told as well, because, I want to also talk about how you got involved with the Armenian Genocide, commemorative committee, because, when did this kind of like play out, and how did that opportunity come to you?
I think just I was involved in college in ASO, High Sharjum, and just different aspects of the Fresno State Armenian community, which I think is one of the focal points of our community, is the way the Fresno State Armenian Studies is able to bring our community together for lectures, for events, for stuff that fosters our culture and the teaching of our history. So I was involved first through there for about 10 years, because I got my bachelor's and then my master's in history. So I was involved at Fresno State for a while. And it was out of that. It was a couple years after I graduated from Fresno State with my MA that they asked me to join the AGCC, and that was as COVID was starting to hit. So the first year I was on it, we were completely virtual. And then I became the secretary the next year, and then the chair the third year, and then rotated off and then rotated back on. But I think it speaks to just the being Armenian and feeling that our story has been denied for so long, and that growing up in high school, in college, telling people about the Armenian Genocide, and other people saying, well, I heard there's another side to that, or I heard there's something else, or I heard that it might not have happened like that. And I had a lot of acquaintances and friends tell me that in high school, and you just feel this drive to tell people and prove it. And part of me thinks that I went into history because of that. And so talking about the Armenian genocide for me and like for most of us has always been very important. Like telling our story and feeling, I kind of had an anxiety, like I needed to have all of the facts, because when I was confronted, I need to have the facts ready. I can't just, now that I'm learning about what it means to be Armenian, I can't just be Armenian. I have to be not just prepared, but ultra prepared to talk to people about the genocide, because I could run into denial. And then I felt like this pressure on me for that. So I think that's where kind of this drive to talk about the genocide or to commemorate the genocide happened. Yeah. Out of college, I joined the committee. And then what we've really been pushing the last 3 years, it kind of took a break after COVID, was our genocide education project. So we partner with an organization called the Genocide Education Project that teaches teachers how to teach the Armenian genocide. So 2 years ago, we hosted several workshops. Last year, we hosted several. So we're trying to reach out to high school teachers and teach them how to teach the genocide. Because as an Armenian, in high school myself, there was one line about the genocide in the textbook, and that was that 300,000 people died mysteriously. It didn't say why or how, just 300,000 people died. And I remember reading that in the textbook, and probably a lot of other Armenians had a similar story, and feeling like we need to do better. And I didn't start the Genocide Education Project. That happened before COVID. That's actually a separate organization that partners with us, but I didn't start that partnership. That happened before COVID. But we rekindled it a few years ago, and I think that is a passion of mine too, to make sure that the Armenian genocide is being taught in high schools and that teachers know how to teach it, because from growing up myself and remembering how it was taught to me, it either wasn't or it was mentioned in passing with false facts. So that's kind of how I got involved. It was pre-COVID. Yeah. I was asked to join the committee kind of because of my involvement in the Armenian studies during college. And then just kind of having this passion to make sure that the Armenian genocide is being taught is also, it's been a passion, I guess you could say.
That's really fascinating, because I think that's part of the reason why that's why I and other journalists are very passionate about doing these sort of stories, these Armenian stories, because like you said, it's the denial that still exists. That's something that, we can't really say about something like the Holocaust, right? Because Germany has owned up to its crimes and has paid back basically and moved on pretty much, right? That hasn't happened at all with Turkey. It doesn't seem like it's going to happen in modern day, which makes it that much more important to have our facts in check, because like you said earlier, we all have a story. My grandpa on my dad's side of the family, he has stories about his mom being one of the only kids to survive out of, I think, 6 or 7 kids in the Syrian death marches in the deserts. And that's how they ended up in Aleppo. And that's how my grandpa ended up being born in Aleppo. But you hear these sort of stories about, all these families either being wiped out completely, or just 1 or 2 family members either surviving or escaping. And to this day, 110 days later, we still have people that say that was fabricated. It was a lie. There was a war. Turks also died. Well, let me just debunk that first and foremost. If somebody's attacking you, are you going to retaliate? Yes or no? Yes. Yeah. And I think that it's the skew of history that's used so often against the Armenian genocide for some reason or another that makes our work more important.
Yeah, definitely. And especially just since the past 5 years, what's been happening in Artsakh and Azerbaijan. So this is, and even in Turkey itself, you can't move on from that type of history. Our nation has examples. Turkey has examples. When you hide your history and refuse to confront it, and you brought up Germany and the Holocaust. Can you imagine if there were places in Germany with street names that said Hitler, and if Jews were still living as second-class citizens, if there were still hate crimes against Jews? That's not happening because they've reckoned with that past. And in Turkey, you have street signs named after the perpetrators of the Armenian genocide. You have people assassinated or imprisoned for talking about the genocide, and that ethnic cleansing that started 100 years ago has been continuing with Armenians being wiped out of much of that area, and then now in Artsakh in 2020.
Yeah, because there's barely, if any, Armenians left when there was, more than 120,000 in Artsakh. Now it's essentially an empty land that's used as a political toy for, photo ops, it almost seems like. And that's really depressing, especially to see nowadays in 2025 with society being so advanced and the way that the world works with technology and all that. You had like a sliver of civilization that still worked within its means and, upholded Armenian culture, because what other enclaves or provinces or places outside of Armenia do we have that is that Armenian dominated, really? And you can't even say that it was outside of Armenia because it was part of its borders to begin with. Yeah. So it's a really tough situation, because what's next, right? Yeah. What's next for Armenia? Does it uphold its statehood? Do we try to get Artsakh back? It's all stuff that obviously won't happen overnight, but it just all puts it into perspective, the work that we're doing here and why it's important.
Yeah, confronting history. I mean, if Turkey was a true democracy that represented all of its citizens, and if it gave equal rights to minority groups, not just Armenians but Kurds, and if it wasn't the state that it is now, built on the really ashes of the genocide and the Armenians, I think you wouldn't see a lot of those things happening. I think it wouldn't be behaving the way it does right now towards its neighbors and towards minorities within its own country. And it really just goes to show that it's an ongoing process from 1915 to now. And a lot of times people say, well, why are you talking about this? It happened so long ago. Why does it matter? Why is it so important? And we kept saying, because if you're denying your history, if you're not being confronted with it, it can happen again.
Absolutely.
And the situations are never exactly the same. But I think in 2020, it really showed that like this has been an ongoing process, and it's been something that I think even maybe we didn't expect to happen, but we've been talking about the possibility that it could happen, that nothing's been resolved, nothing's been addressed since the Armenian genocide. That issue has not been resolved. And that it did come back with Turkey's involvement in the war in 2020, with Turkish troops training Azerbaijan to attack Armenians and depopulate an entire region.
I think that's the big key here for anyone that's watching that maybe is or isn't even Armenian, is the Armenian genocide still has not been resolved. Yeah. And as much as we like to say it's 110 years this year, contextually, it's not that long.
Yeah.
It's really not, it hasn't been that long. It's maybe a few generations difference. And I don't know, I think the apathy behind some people who are like, oh, it was so long ago, like you said, that's doing more harm than good.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're coming up on time right now. So is there any final things that you want to leave us off on, just what we can expect, or just for April 24 for the commemoration at night? Anything else you want to leave off on?
I think on that last note, and you were talking just about the apathy of like others, and sometimes it's important that we don't ever become apathetic ourselves, because if we're not treasuring and championing this cause and recognition and remembrance, and I mean that also moving forward and creating vibrant cultures wherever we live, but if we are not doing these things, the rest of the world is not going to care, so we have to be at the forefront of this. We have to continue to commemorate. We have to continue to promote our culture. We have to continue to gather and show the strength of our culture. So it's not just a one-time thing building this monument. It's coming together. It's commemorating. It's making sure that we are doing what we can to make sure this never happens again, whether it's through education or political means, petitioning, whatever we can do. It's that apathy that you mentioned, that we have to make sure that we never fall into that, so that we can continue to make sure other people don't fall into that, because our nation is still in a precarious place, stretching back from the same event that happened 110 years ago. And that process, we don't know where that'll be. Like you said, 110 years, in the greater scheme of things, it's a small period. And what is this period going to be? Is this period going to be known as like are they going to look back at it as like the disappearance of the Armenian people over a couple generations, or is it going to be that we prevented that from happening? So it's it's, I guess I don't want to end on a sad note, but it's that.
But it's an important note to end on, because it puts into context why the anniversary is that important.
Yeah.
Because we still don't have a resolution.
And it's not just commemoration, but we need to be educating. We need to be talking to teachers. We need to be talking to students. We need to be organizing in schools. We need to be organizing in politics. But,
yeah. All right. Well, I think that's all the time we have, Michael. Thank you so much. I hope to have you on the show sometime soon, and I look forward to next week, and especially April 24th. If those of you who are watching right now, we also look forward to seeing you there.